The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines. This is LeCain with World News Jam. We bring you the most interesting stories from around the world each week. We just don't give you the news, but we tell you the story behind the news, as well as read and answer your questions in an entertaining and easy to understand way. So please join us on DZRJ 810 AM Radio Bandito TV and get yourself updated with all the interesting news of the week from around the world right here on DZRJ's World News Jam.
Watch and listen to World News Jam, Saturdays, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV right here in Manila. My name is LeCain, bringing you some of the most interesting stories from around the world. Thank you so much for joining our discussion this morning. Now, today, of course, we'll be talking about the U.S. election and our ongoing coverage leading up to and after the election. Also, can we handle another pandemic? And is one coming soon? We have an update on what's going on in Russia, and is North Korea now officially fighting the war in Ukraine? Also a look at Japan, its climate issues, its elections, and its new views on same-sex marriage. So thank you so much for joining us today for our discussion on stuff going on around the world. Let's get to it. Okay, so the U.S. election for president is just a few days away. Remember when we were saying it's next year, and then we said it's a few months, and then 1 month? Remember what we were thinking then versus what we are thinking now? At the beginning, people were saying, these two old guys, Biden and Trump, this is our choices. This is the best we have. The polls were saying it's close. Then later, Biden doesn't stand a chance, and Trump will be the next president again. And, ooh, we can't let this happen again. Many in the Democratic side started to lose their minds, telling the Republicans, hey, he's too dangerous. You need to stop this. Many Republicans agreed, but only in the shadows. We all know what can happen to your career if you go up against Trump. He has a cult-like following, and they will do anything he asks them to do, including buying Trump merchandise, maybe storm the Capitol in order to overthrow the government, or vote Republicans out of office if they say anything negative about Trump. I can tell you how many people said they just can't understand why Republicans like him so much, especially the poor, Christian, working class ones. He's exactly the opposite of who they are. He's rich and gives tax breaks to the rich, and he has no social welfare programs to help the poor. Before the presidency, no one ever saw him in a church or ever heard him talk about religion ever. And now they refer to him as the next Jesus, the only one that can save them. Meanwhile, the Democrat Kamala Harris has based her whole platform on helping the poor and the middle class. She's a lifelong Christian who has a Jewish husband, and yet Trump's people say she's the embodiment of Satan himself. Nearly Trump's entire presidential cabinet from his first term as president is saying he should never be president again. These are not Democrats or liberal Satan-worshiping pedophiles that MAGA people are always talking about. These are Republicans, distinguished, well-respected Republicans. Some of them are the top military generals in the country. They aren't telling us to vote for Harris. They are saying, whatever you do, don't vote for Trump. They even started referring to him as the F word, fascists. What does that even really mean? When is the last time you heard anyone refer to a president of the United States as a fascist? Not that I can remember. This is why it's hard for many people to wrap their heads around the Trump phenomenon. This week, Trump gave his final closing arguments on why we should elect him. In fact, both candidates did. But what contrasting differences between the two? First of all, Harris gave her speech in the exact spot where Trump sent the crowd of his followers to take back the country and maybe kill the vice president and some of the people of the Democratic Party. Harris said, "We all know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood in this very spot and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election, an election he knew he lost." America, we know what Donald Trump has in mind. I offer a different path. I ask for your vote. She called Trump unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. She said Trump would return to the White House with an enemies list, while she would walk in with a to-do list. She said Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That's who he is, she said. But America, I am here tonight to say that's not who we are. All right. Pretty powerful stuff, I guess. And the things she said are not untrue. I mean, every Trump rally is packed with speeches of how he's going to seek revenge or how he was cheated or how he seems to want to be able to go after his political opponents, maybe even use the military. So I can see how she might say these things, but Trump takes things to a whole different level. His rally in Madison Square Garden, New York City this week, he started with a conservative comedian. Yes, there is such a thing. He said there's a massive piece of floating garbage in the ocean now, and it's called Puerto Rico. Did another joke about Puerto Rico not using enough birth control. Also, Jews is cheap and Palestinians is rock throwers. Then threw in a joke about black people liking watermelons. This is how the rally started. Now, the quote that is getting the most attention from that guy is the one about Puerto Rico. I mean, there are 470,000 Puerto Ricos living in Pennsylvania alone, the one state that could decide the entire election. And this also revives past issues of Trump holding up aid to Puerto Rico after it was hit by a hurricane and throwing paper towels at a crowd of Puerto Ricans who were having trouble getting food and water at the time. Anyway, the whole rally went in some rhetoric that was at times, I don't know, kind of hard to watch, referring to Harris as a fake, a fraud, and alluding her to being a prostitute with her pimp handlers. Then this whole thing about her being the Antichrist. They brought up Hillary Clinton, who ran against Trump in 2016, how she's a sick SOB. In fact, the whole effing party was sick. The speaker at the time called them a bunch of degenerates and lowlives, Jew haters. Did I mention that Kamala Harris is married to a Jew? Then good old Tucker Carlson, he got on stage and referred to Kamala Harris as a low IQ Samoan Malaysian, saying she's not impressive. So just to be clear, Harris is neither from America Samoa or Malaysia. And then the rally went to Vivek Ramaswamy, saying that if Trump is elected, the U.S. will have one of the largest deportations of immigrants in history. I'm assuming getting rid of people with names like Ramaswamy. Of course, Hulk Hogan was there, the retired professional wrestler who was supposed to tear off his T-shirt at the end of his speech, but had a lot of trouble getting that T-shirt to tear. Remember, Hulk Hogan is 71 years old. Also, Elon Musk spoke about being Garth MAGA. Even Melania Trump was there. She spoke. That was a surprise because she hasn't spoken or even been at any event during the whole campaign. Although she did just release a book, so then there's that. But then Trump took the stage into the 6-hour event. He didn't really say anything crazier that he's already said, but he didn't really hit hard on his promise to stop people from entering the country from the outside. In fact, even before he got on stage, his people hammered home that America is not for foreigners, it's for Americans. Trump accused Harris of importing criminal migrants from prisons and jails, insane asylums, and mental institutions from around the world, from Venezuela to the Congo. He said he will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which would allow a president to quickly deport non-citizens without due process, even if they are from a country that is at war with the U.S. Last time this was used was, I think World War II. However, like I said, this is for countries that the U.S. is currently at war with. As far as my sources say, the U.S. is not currently at war with anyone, but that may change. He claimed that Harris vowed to abolish the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. Now, I was trying to figure out where he might have gotten that from. Maybe when Harris criticized Trump for separating immigrant children from their families when he was president by saying we need to start over on immigration. I'm not exactly sure, but I can't find anywhere where she actually said anything even close to that. And if she did, of course, the media would have gone after her big time. But in any case, that was Trump's main point or focus. No matter what the subject was, he managed to somehow find a way back to immigration. He brought up the subject of inflation and how she signed into law the creation of the worst inflation in U.S. history. Here again, inflation spiked to 9% in 2022, just after the coronavirus. That was the highest in the last 40 years, but so did the rest of the world. Inflation shot up all over Europe and Asia and is still up. Currently, the U.S. inflation has dropped to 2.4%, which puts the U.S. near the best economy recoveries of all major economies around the world. That's the talking point you always hear from Democrats, that the U.S. economy is the envy of the world. And, well, there is some truth to that. Now, Trump has said multiple times that Harris is allowing the public schools to take our kids and change their sex right there in the school. He said your child goes to school and comes home with a different sex. So far, I can find nothing to back that statement up. Neither can anyone else, but he does keep saying it. In the rally, he said Harris has called for a free sex change operation on illegal aliens at the taxpayers' expense. So, in other words, American taxpayers are footing the bill for illegal immigrants to have sex reassignment surgery. Now, that may sound like just another false statement Trump made, but actually, I looked into this. When Harris was Attorney General in California, she was against sex change surgery for inmates, but she has somewhat changed her mind since that time. Moving over to the left, saying that she now approves of access to gender reaffirming surgery to transgender inmates. Of course, the question I have is, once you change the sex of an inmate, do you then have to put them in the prison of the other sex? Currently, federal law requires that prisons provide necessary medical treatment to transgender inmates, and in some states, gender reaffirming surgery. That was also the law under Trump. But the current number of times that has actually happened in a prison so far is 2. So far, no illegal aliens have ever had gender reassignment surgery while in prison. But the main theme of the Madison Square Garden rally was really about the enemy within. The people in the country that are the true enemy to the Trump supporters. The point that Trump wants to make to the country is that it's us against them. They are the enemy. That no other enemy in the world, not the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, is worse than them, the Democrats. According to Trump, they are the true enemy of the people. You know, besides the press and immigrants who are poisoning our society. You may have heard many people this week reminiscing of a 1939 rally in the same place, Madison Square Garden, by the Nazis. People may not know, but the Nazi movement in America back then was huge. The rally in 1939 has been compared to the Trump rally from last week. The purpose of the 1939 rally was to show that people that are not white or are not on the side of the white Aryan nation should not even be in the U.S., which is kind of what Hitler was saying in Germany at the time. And all this comes after statements made by Trump's former chief of staff about Trump wishing his generals were more like Hitler's. If you go back in history, Hitler did say that the Jews and the gypsies were coming to rob and murder your family and will poison the white race. Trump did make a comment during the rally that there should be the death penalty for illegal immigrants, that they are rapists and murderers, and they are poisoning the blood of America. He said the savage Venezuelan prison gangs had taken over Times Square, and that the Biden administration did not have the money to spend on hurricane victims because he wanted to fly these immigrants in on beautiful jet planes. Now, I'm sure if you ever heard or ever flown to the U.S., it's not that easy to get on a plane without a visa or to get past Homeland Security without the proper documentation. Sure, you can sneak across the border, walk over mountains, crawl under fences, but flying into the U.S. without proper documentation, it's not that easy. But Trump added some new ideas to his them, saying that this goes deeper than just Kamala Harris. He said, "We are not running against Kamala. I think a lot of our politicians here tonight know this. She means nothing. She's purely a vessel. That's all she is. We're running against something far bigger than Joe and Kamala and far more powerful than them, which is a massive, vicious, radical left machine that runs today's Democratic Party. They're just vessels." So is this true? Is there a secret society in the U.S. that is going to come after you, the real American? I was talking to a Filipino this past week living in America, and they were asking if I thought that Trump would deport them if he was elected. And the answer to that question is, I really don't know. I mean, how much of what Trump says is just to get half the country afraid enough to vote for him? And how much of it is he really going to do what he says? I'm still not exactly sure why Trump would spend so much time in New York, the city that he comes from. The polls show him losing there by at least 15 points, the same city that found him guilty of 34 felonies of tax fraud and found him guilty of sexual abuse, in which he will have to pay $80+ million. And he is still going to be sentenced after the election in New York for that guilty verdict. In some ways, New York holds the key to whether Trump will go to prison if he loses the election. I really believe Trump really doesn't want the campaign part of this election to end. He will either end up with a job that he hates, the presidency, or he will possibly go to jail, or at least continue to stand trial a few more times. Anyway, Trump did the Joe Rogan podcast this week. Now, if you don't know who Joe Rogan is, he's the announcer for the UFC. It has a very popular podcast, used to be about sports fighting, but then he started to get into other subjects like UFOs and giant snakes and politics. And he likes Trump. He really dislikes Kamala Harris. I mean, Trump kind of falls into the category of guys who might listen to the Joe Rogan podcast. So it's a very friendly discussion, but there were some things that Trump said that even made Joe Rogan have a question. He asked Trump about the last election, to which Trump continued to say he was cheated. He has been saying that for years, but as of now, there is no concrete proof that dead people voted and illegal immigrants voted and voting machines switched votes from Trump to Biden. So Rogan asked him do you have any proof? Trump said, oh, there's lots of proof. So Rogan said, well, what is it? This is where things get frustrating because he just says there's so much proof, but what? What is it? He said he has so many documents with so much proof, but he went through and lost 60 plus court trials because he really didn't have any of those documents, which to this day, no one is really seeing. But then there was some really weird issues he brought up about windmills and whales. Trump has always been a huge critic of windmills, mostly because how it looks next to his golf courses. And he's been claiming that windmills kill whales. He said it makes the whales go crazy and that more whales are washing up on the coast because of windmills. He said he wished that he could be a whale psychiatrist to help the whales with their problems with the wind. Speaking of the beach, Trump said that he got along very well with Kim Jong-un and that he told Kim to take some time off from building nuclear weapons and head to the beach and relax. He said to Kim that he and Trump should build some condos on the North Korean beaches. Of course, remember Kim signing an agreement with Trump in regards to speeding up of the denuclearization process in North Korea, but in the end, that didn't really change anything in regards to North Korea's continuing acquisition of nuclear weapons. But it was a great photo op. But in the end, North Korea is well known for agreeing and then not following through, which Trump's advisors told him might happen. He went on to say that the Ukrainian war would have never happened if Trump was president. He told Rogan that he can't say what he actually told Putin, but it's because of what Trump said that Putin would have never gone to war. He said the reason he invaded Ukraine was because he didn't respect Joe Biden. He said that he and Putin are very close and that Putin would do what Trump tells him to. In any case, that interview went on for 3 hours. A lot of times it was about things that neither Rogan or Trump seemed to know too much about. Trump said he believes there is life on Mars and that he had several talks with jet pilots who have seen things. Rogan said, well, we put probes there and rovers and nothing. He said, I don't think there's any life there. To which Trump said, maybe it's life we don't know about. Trump also said his life is great, that he's super healthy. You know, Trump got a lot of criticism for not showing his health records. He's been pressured to release them, but for some reason he won't. He said doctors say he's in perfect, excellent health. He said about his exam, I was never one that could run on a treadmill. When passing a physical, they asked me to run on a treadmill and then they make it steeper and steeper and steeper. And the doctor said it was at the Walter Reed Hospital. They said, it's unbelievable. I'm telling you, I felt I could have gone all day. He went on to say that treadmills are really boring and he prefers to stay healthy by playing golf, which, as we know, Trump does a lot of. But in any case, with all the odd things that Trump and his people say, some of which you might think would turn voters off. But Trump is still in a virtual tie in the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, it's just one state. But the way the election is shaping up, that one state could be, I believe anyway, the deciding factor in the election. And right now, it's a virtual tie there. I mean, the polls have it at a tie, 49% to 49%. I mean, it could be that 10 Trump supporters decide not to vote, or 10 people for Harris decided not to vote. That might decide the whole thing. Or maybe some Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania decide to switch their vote. But also in regard to that thing about Puerto Rico being an island of floating garbage, Joe Biden, who has really been an afterthought in this election, spoke out just about that subject this week, and he accidentally let one loose. He said, well, let me tell you something. He doesn't know about Puerto Ricans that I know. They are good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. Biden paused for a moment, and he said his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American. All right, so Trump's people immediately said, so he's calling us garbage now? Biden put out a statement that he was talking about the people speaking at Trump's rally, not the actual supporters. Oops. But this is the thing that many people have talked about this week. Trump and Republicans can say anything and it's just fine. In fact, their base loves it when they say somewhat crazy stuff. But if Harris were to make one little mistake or say something wrong, could bring the whole campaign down. And that Biden gaffe just spread like wildfire. Every conservative show jumping all over it. In an election this close, even if 10 people change their vote, it can make all the difference in the world. But I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, mostly because most of you people that are listening to this show are Filipino. So you can't vote at a U.S. election anyway. We are here just to tell the story. I spoke to so many people in the Philippines in regard to this election, and it's very much just like it is in the U.S. It's a tie. The number of people that like Trump and the number of people that don't like him is the same. And with Kamala Harris, it's kind of the same. The people don't like Harris. They say the reason they don't like her is because she's just too dumb. So I ask, how do you know she's dumb? It's because what they heard Trump say. I ask people, why don't you like Trump? They say, well, because he's a Nazi. I say, well, why do you think he's a Nazi? Because his former chief of staff and a 4-star general said he is. I mean, I can safely say that Kamala Harris is not dumb. Just watch the debate between her and Trump, or watch her as a senator when she shredded rich white men in those senatorial hearings. And is Trump a Nazi? Or is he a clear danger to the democracy of the U.S.? Would he allow Putin to take over the Ukraine? Would he allow China to take back Taiwan? If he wins, I guess we will see. And if he doesn't win, what will happen? Will the U.S. become, as he says, completely unlivable and be the worst country to live in the world? Unless, of course, you're an illegal immigrant who's a transgender. You know, the world has dealt with asteroids slamming into it, with extinction-level volcanic events, and a pandemic. It will most likely survive a U.S. election. I guess the only question is, will its people? And this is the World News Jam on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. I am Eric LeCain. Speaking of a pandemic, remember COVID? I guess it's a little too early to say that. Of course, we remember COVID. Maybe 20 years from now, we can say, do you remember that COVID? But will we already have been in another pandemic before that? And that answer is maybe. There's been cases of H5N1 popping up in the U.S. lately. That's basically the avian flu. So the U.S. did some investigating to see what's happening and why the cases of the avian flu are popping up. And well, they didn't like what they found. They are finding the virus in cows, a lot of cows, enough for experts to worry. So much that the U.S. has asked Moderna to make a vaccine just in case this gets out of control. I mean, H5N1 is a fast-moving and rapidly evolving virus. You don't want that thing evolving. It can cause severe illness and death, you know, if you're kind of weak and elderly, just like COVID did. But now that we have one pandemic under our belt, are we ready for the next one, just in case it's coming? Well, that's a big Many believe on the next go-round, we would have just as many problems as we did on the first go-round. And in many ways, H5N1 is worse than we went through before. Of all the people that have had the virus, only 50% have actually survived. But without the proper testing equipment, the virus may have already spread and we don't even know it yet. We don't really know because no one has developed a test that can be given out on a massive scale for that particular virus. Right now, you must go to a high-tech lab. Even then, you must wait several weeks for the results. During COVID, we had tests that could tell you in around 10 to 15 minutes. But then again, that wasn't right away. We also must monitor the bird and animal populations and get an accurate count of animals infected. Of course, the issue is, can this strain of disease be passed from animal to human and then from human to human? Now, in case you didn't know, but just recently there was an outbreak of E. coli virus coming from McDonald's in the U.S. It seems the onions that were being served in the McDonald's Big Mac in Colorado had E. coli. Now, since the news came out, customers' visits had dropped 24% in Colorado. Now, my reaction is 24%? That means 76% still want to eat there? Anyway, I mean, with all our medical technology, somehow we just can't seem to stop these viruses from occurring. Part of this has to do with the political fallout of how we handle it. In the U.S., people still believe COVID was really just made up. We didn't need all this mask wearing and vaccine taking. It was just to make some big companies richer. Also, the president, who was Trump at the time, he kept saying the virus isn't that bad and it will just die out on its own when the weather gets warmer. This is while 7 million people died worldwide. This week, England's chief medical officer said that COVID was bad, but it could have been much, much worse. He said that we have to assume a future pandemic of the same scale or bigger will occur again. That it's a certainty and it's foolish not to think so. That's according to that doctor. When you start to hear what other doctors were saying, COVID was like having a terrorist attack every day. In England, there were so many dead that they had to put them in garbage bags because they didn't have enough body bags. And if this happens again, will they still have the same issues with intensive care units? Medical chief also said that we can buy more beds and we can make sure there's enough space for another pandemic, but we also have to make sure people are trained properly to deal with a massive amount of patients at once, which we are not. He said that when the next pandemic hits, we need trained people to hold the line and wait for science to catch up. He said this was part of the problem before. There were so many patients that could have been saved, but hospitals just didn't have the capacity or the know-how to handle that many patients at once. Also, how to utilize the equipment to handle such large groups at once. One of the problems during COVID was that once they finally figured out the protocols and agreed to implement this and that, well, it was already too late. The issue being they didn't know if they were pitching the ideas too low and there wouldn't be enough, or pitching the ideas too high, thus overselling it. Right now, politically, you will be accountable for both. Even in the U.S., some of the best scientists in the world at diseases were cast as villains for telling us about a disease, trying to explain it. The disease was, this disease that we had at the time was killing us. So if this happened again, would we do the same thing knowing what we know now? Would we just make the same mistakes again? Scientists have said there is something called disease X out there somewhere. An unknown pathogen will cause another pandemic. Now, this disease X is hypothetical at this point, but it's real and a serious concern of the World Health Organization. Many scientists and experts, even there, says there's no question that there is a disease currently being carried in an animal that we have never seen before. And this disease could mutate into something completely different that is maybe not bad for animals, but completely deadly to us. They say it's around a 1 in 50 chance in a year, or about a 38% chance in a human's lifetime. 38%? A 38% chance? That's kind of big, don't you think? This is based on the idea of a family of known viruses that can already jump from animals to humans and have the ability, based on the probability of a mutation, that it could be deadly. Now, we know viruses mutate. We learned that from COVID. It's inevitable. I mean, SARS, MERS, Zika, and there's several new ones. But if there is a mutation of any one of those, how would we know it before, it's too late? There's actually a plan now at 𝗪cie, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. They have a 100-day mission plan. Within 100 days of a discovery of a novel infectious disease, a vaccine must be developed. In other words, according to them, it will take around 100 days to make a vaccine for that type of virus. Remember before, it took a while to figure out who was working on what company would the government recognize it's working on it? Different countries didn't want to share their information. Well, supposedly they have a plan that will combat all of this. And just to get you ready, there actually was a new, recently discovered strain called XEC, a subvariant of the Omicron strain. Remember that one? This XEC is responsible for 10.7% of all the COVID infections in the U.S. right now. Now, it's not any worse than the original COVID strain, but still, for some reason, these new strains keep appearing. Remember, COVID spread around the world? So it's not going to just go away like that. Like it just comes and goes. It's going to be here for a while. And it keeps on changing and changing, and just waiting to find a crack to slip through our defenses. And when it does, will we be ready? Will people vilify our scientists and threaten to kill them if they tell us we need to wear a mask again? Will our politicians not take it seriously again? Or will the human race be smarter the next time around? This is LeCain on the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio, talking about interesting stories going on around the world. Just a quick update. Remember last week when I was talking about the North Korean troops that had sneaked into Russia in order to train to enter the war in Ukraine, and finally how the U.S. acknowledged that the North Koreans were even in Russia? We even reported it here on the Jam way before the U.S. government said anything about it, although I'm assuming they wanted to be absolutely sure first before announcing it to the world. I mean, Russia had already denied it twice, so the U.S. can't afford to make an error on something as big as this. In any case, there was this video of North Koreans in Russia training, the Russians giving them Russian uniforms and claiming they are from a northern city, which the population looks somewhat like Asian or North Koreans. But of course, those from that northern city don't normally speak Korean like those guys were doing. And the question of why is Russia hiring so many Korean translators? Well, this week, according to several intelligence officials in South Korea and Ukraine, North Korean soldiers are now in Ukraine. I mean, I guess that's no big surprise. You don't just send 10,000 troops to Russia without them doing something. And according to reports, some Koreans are on the way to the area in Russia that is currently being held by the Ukrainians. Remember last week we said that was a high probability. But still, the U.S. has not mentioned any of this. They are being very careful about what they release. In any case, this week, officials from South Korea are going to Washington to discuss the new info about the North Koreans and their new friendship with Russia. Also, there is a meeting set for the top Ukrainian officials to meet with the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State of the U.S. to see what they can do about this situation. South Korea has also had a meeting with officials at NATO headquarters to talk about what will happen next. Now, South Korea has a policy of not arming countries that are currently at war. However, NATO is hoping that they will make an exception in this particular case because they are currently, in theory, at war with North Korea still. And if North Korea is teaming up with Russia right now in an ongoing war, does this constitute a security threat to the South Koreans. Still not exactly clear how North Korea is going to be involved in the war, but as soon as we see a video of one of them shooting a gun, this is going to change everything. Intelligence sources have said, we believe that North Korea thinks it has superior combat skills to that of Russia and that they will be highly valuable. However, they have not been in any active war in 70 years, so this could be good training for them in a possible upcoming clash with South Korea. In an intercepted audio, you can hear Russians wondering what they're going to do with the Koreans once they are there in Ukraine. I mean, they don't speak any Russian. It's not like you can teach them Russian in a few weeks. Remember, these are lifelong soldiers, not linguistic experts. Supposedly, the Russians are giving them basic words to speak, like shoot and duck. They believe there is one interpreter for every 30 Korean soldiers. Remember, there are 10,000 Koreans there, although this could be 13,000, depending on which intelligence agency you are listening to. But one thing is clear, that there will be even more going there very soon, that the deal Russia has made with North Korea, according to intelligence sources, is they will get more soldiers, which opens another Pandora box. What if some of those soldiers decide to defect? Almost 0% of the population of North Korea has ever left the country, and the chances of them ever leaving in the future is next to none. So it stands to reason, if you finally get out of the country, there's a very big chance that you might want to make a run for it. That's for sure. And I'm sure the Ukrainians are already thinking of this issue and what value a North Korean soldier might be. Also, right now, the U.S. has been in contact with China about this situation. The U.S. and China are not exactly friends. However, China and North Korea are currently trading partners of sorts. The U.S. has asked China to ask North Korea to please back off. They are also asking other countries to ask China to have a talk with North Korea. But right now, China has a big trade relationship with Russia. So very few believe that China would even lift a finger to get North Korea to back out of any of this. This is not in China's best interest. And of course, China only does what's in its best interest. Meanwhile, this week, just to make things more interesting, North Korea tested one of its new Hwasong-19 ballistic missiles. The point of firing off this missile was to time it around the same week as the U.S. election, which they did. Maybe it might make some news, or maybe even get into the talking points of one of the candidates. It is very important to Kim Jong-un to stay relevant and to be in the Western media. What good is firing your giant missiles if no one talks about it? The missile hit the altitude of 7,688 kilometers and a distance of 1,001 kilometers. This is actually very scary. Supposedly, it was in the air for around 86 minutes before falling into the ocean in the northern part of Japan, just outside its economic zone. This was a solid fuel rocket, which we have talked about before on the show. This allows the missile to be fired quicker and is very mobile. In other words, you can move it on a 12-wheel vehicle and fire it off within minutes. In other words, you can get it off the ground before it's detected and somebody destroys it. And then there's a picture of Kim Jong-un and his daughter watching the missile take off, which is rather interesting. His daughter has been pictured in several military events now, but everyone back in the West is up in arms about this launch because theoretically, this missile could have hit the U.S. if its trajectory was altered. Remember when I said it was scary, the height that this thing went to? The U.S. said that it was a clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions, and it needlessly raises tensions in the area. Okay, of course. Which leads us to another obvious question. Is North Korea asking Russia for help in its nuclear weapons endeavors? Possibly as a trade for sending its troops to help in the Ukraine. Maybe the North is just asking for a few missiles, to study. This is not far from what Russia is currently doing with Iran, in which they trade technology for Iranian drones and missiles. This is the possible opportunity that North Korea has been looking for. If it has this technology, it could jump over many of its tech problems and become a nuclear power way before it was assumed it would. And this is the most worrisome possibility for South Korea or even the U.S. If North Korea had a full-blown nuclear weapon, this would boost them right to the top of the world's order that has weapons of mass destruction. And with its ballistic missile now able to hit a U.S. target, they are no longer just a small, poor country. Again, it's a big opportunity to interject itself on the world stage, to become relevant again, just like in an election. Even if it's not good news, it's better than no news. I think Kim Jong-un just wants to be seen in the West. He wants to be seen as a force to be heard and noticed. And if Trump wins, you can be sure Trump will push for another meeting with North Korea, and it will be an even bigger photo op than it was the last time. So North Korea is making waves again. It's hard to believe that Putin would give North Korea a nuclear weapon, but maybe. And if South Korea starts supplying weapons to Ukraine, what will that mean to Russia? Will Russia then back North Korea in its fight against the South? By the way, what are they fighting for at this point anyway? Kim Jong-un has already said that has now realized that the unification of the two countries, the North and South Koreas, will never be. Are they just fighting now because they don't like each other? I'm just mentioning this because if North Korea gives weapons to the Ukraine, this will open the door to a much bigger conflict. And that's something I think that neither of the Koreans need at this point. This is LeCain on the World News Jam, bringing you interesting stories that are going on around the world. Japan. It's one of those countries that we want to focus on today. One of the reasons is what's happening on Mount Fuji right now. If you were to look at Mount Fuji today, you would see a beautiful piece of scenery, a brown mountain surrounded by green forests and blue sky in the background. It looks like a postcard. The problem is Mount Fuji is supposed to be white. In October, Fuji should already have snow on it. But for the first time in 130 years, Fuji doesn't have any snow yet. This is raising a lot of concerns about Mount Fuji, the temperature of Japan, maybe even climate change. There's been snowfall on Fuji every year in October since 1894. But so far this year, no snow. The last few months have been unseasonably warm in Japan. In fact, it's not just warm, it's the hottest this year it has ever been in the history of Japan, or at least since they've been keeping records. So far, 74 cities have recorded temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius or higher. I mean, this is not much of a surprise in Japan, seeing that the world is on track to have the hottest year ever, or at least ever recorded. And Japan, these warmer winters have affected tourism, local economies, food, water supplies, even allergies. On Fuji, which is a major tourist spot, there is a kind of overload right now on tourism because of the weather. This has brought in a lot of unwanted things, lots of littering and overtaxing of the toilets. Many amateurs are coming with improper gear, resulting in a higher number of accidents and injuries on the mountain. This has led officials to raise the rates of the admission on the mountain and limit the number of climbers to 4,000 per day. But this is not the only danger Japan is currently facing. Japan's government has been running continuously since 1955 by the Liberal Democratic Party, but those days are at an end. People are angry, inflation, cost of living, financial scandals, so they took a vote. One of those snap election votes that they do in Parliament to gain more power. It was a gamble the new prime minister took, and it did not pay off well. They could only get 215 of the 465 seats of the House of Representatives, and you need to get at least 233. Now, when something like this happens, in general, the prime minister probably will step down and give up his seat to the majority. However, the prime minister 𝗪cie𝗿𝗋, said he will stay for now, since he really just got there. He said people have delivered a very harsh judgment on the party, and it's one that he must take seriously. At this point, it's unclear who will actually be governing Japan right now. The past Sunday, the LDP has been handed its worst results since 2009, has been forced to give control to the opposition party completely. Now, there is one option to try, that's to create a coalition. We know about this from talking about parliamentary governments. Coalition to another party and rule as the minority government. However, in the end, the new prime minister could end up losing his seat that he just got. The Constitutional Democracy Party, the CDP, said our goal was to break the ruling party's majority, and we have achieved that, which is a great accomplishment. In any case, the public has not been happy at all with the state of the most recent government. Families and households are facing many high financial burdens, and this goes hand in hand with the weakness of the yen. The prime minister finally the last prime minister anyway, if you remember, we talked about here on the show, he finally had to resign amidst a major funding scandal. And the new prime minister, 𝗪cie𝗿𝗋, who was the former defense minister, said he would not endorse several party lawmakers caught up in the scandal and backtracked on several key policies, such as letting women keep their maiden names after marriage and the creation of the Asian NATO, which I thought wasn't such a bad idea, although the U.S. did not like it. He pledged to help low-income families and raise minimum wage. He was trying to do his best, but still, his party has faltered. The election comes just before the U.S. election, in which Japan has kept very close ties with the Biden administration and hopes whoever the next president is, that he or she will continue its coalition amidst the continuing issues with China and the fact that North Korea keeps firing those missiles at them. One other interesting piece of news to come out of Japan this week is the court ruling on same-sex marriage. Remember Taiwan and Thailand? They already changed their laws on same-sex marriage, and it looks like Japan may not be far behind. The court ruled this past Wednesday that a lack of legal recognition of same-sex marriage violates the right to equality under the orientation, but also ruled that the plaintiffs, these same-sex couples, were not entitled to any damages made by the suit. Of course, the court also ruled that a ban on same-sex marriages violates the section of the Constitution that says laws concerning matters pertaining to marriage and family shall be enacted from the standpoint of individual dignity and the essential equalities of the sexes. That the previous civil laws lead to discriminatory treatment of people based on their sexual orientation. Now, there were seven total plaintiffs in the suit, including, same-sex couples, who each wanted 1 million yen each because their rights were violated. But since the Supreme Court has not ruled as of yet, they cannot demand the state pay compensation. But even so, they won. One of the plaintiffs said, "The presiding judge's words flowed in my head, and I realized that the judge took our arguments to heart. I am happy to be here today." Japan remains the only group of 7 major industrial countries, the G7, that has not legalized same-sex marriage. Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and the UK and the US all allow same-sex marriages. Now, in the Philippines, there has been calls for same-sex marriage, and the Congress has discussed, and surveys show that there's a growing support for same-sex marriage. However, as of yet, there is no law that allows for same-sex marriage, and there is currently no legislation being looked at to allow it in the Philippines. So if you're in the Philippines, you may need to soon be able to take a trip to Japan to get married to your spouse, if he's a man and you're a man and he's Japanese. Good luck with that. This is LeCain on the World News Jam here on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the show for our discussions of ongoing things around the world. Please join us again next week for more interesting stories. So until then, this is LeCain on the World News Jam. Please be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.